We're lucky to have Cindy Ayala come to us, who's the program coordinator through the Probation Department of Restorative Justice. Let's take a moment, and forgive me for those of you that look at this every day on your website, but how do we define restorative justice for those who may not be really familiar with this concept? It's a concept and a process to involve, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific offense and to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations. And they do that in order to heal and put things as right as possible. A criminologist approached it this way. It's a process where all stakeholders affected by an injustice have an opportunity to discuss how they have been affected by the injustice and to decide what should be done to repair the harm. With crime, restorative justice is about the idea that because crime hurts, justice should heal. It follows that conversations with those who have been hurt and with those who have inflicted the harm must be central to the process. Our purpose for having Cindy come and talk tonight is actually multi-purpose. People should be aware of this program. People should be aware that it's accessible. People should be aware that this is an opportunity that may not have previously been available. Depending on what community you're in, depending on the programs that are offered in each community, we should be grateful that the Department of Probation has actively reached out to the community, and we know this, and invite people into this process. We're lucky to have Cindy Ayala, who is a well-regarded member of our community. You cannot walk through Marin Center and talk to anyone without them being aware of the Probation Department. It's with pleasure we invited her to come, and it's with pleasure that we now turn the mic over to Cindy. Cindy, welcome.
Thank you so much, Denise. I'm so impressed with your introduction. You have done your homework, and I am so glad to hear the definitions that you shared on restorative justice. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to come and talk about restorative justice with my community, and to have the Marin County Law Library recognize the needs of the community and find innovative ways of educating people and providing answers to many of their questions is something extraordinary. And I wanted to thank you and your team, Lori, and your staff for putting this together. Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk about restorative justice. So as Denise mentioned, there are several levels to this presentation. One is to talk about restorative justice as the general approach. What do we mean when we talk about restorative justice? And also specifically, what do we understand by this specific program that we have here at the Probation Department, a restorative justice program that is a victim offender dialogue program, essentially. And so I wanted to start with, let me share my screen here with you all and see if I can provide some good information about this. Let's see if I can go back. There you go. So as mentioned, I work for the Marin County Probation Department. Here in California, we are the first probation department to have an in-house restorative justice program for adults. And that is in-house. That is not a contractor or a community agency that we refer to. That it's within our walls, which has its great benefits. I come from Montreal, Canada, where I was working and doing the same kind of work, but the restorative justice program there worked as a separate stakeholder in the criminal justice system. When I moved out here to California, this program was embedded in the probation department. Now that I have discovered in the past 5 years, great benefits because I have way more access to information regarding the parties, regarding the incident. And so I am much better equipped and even connected to community services that our probation department is already connected to. So I'm in a much better position to be able to identify the needs of the parties that choose to participate in this program. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about how the program actually works and how do people get referred to our program and what does the process actually look like. Before I go into that, I did want to, Denise did a great job in defining what restorative justice is. So before we go into the actual practice of this program, let's talk about restorative justice as an approach. It's a philosophy of sorts. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of addressing crime in a different way. Let's look at when crime happens, instead of it just being a violation of a crime, restorative justice looks at a crime as something that happened in our community. There was harm that was caused, and there were people that were affected.
What is it?
Yes.
Leave the room.
No,
They can hear you. They can hear you. Leave the room.
Oh. I
I
think there was a speaker. We will leave the questions or comments for a little later. I think we have 45 minutes or so for the presentation. We have a few minutes at the end for some questions.
That's absolutely correct.
If you can mute your mic until then, that would be much appreciated.
*6 for folks that aren't familiar with the process.
Thank you, Denise. So as mentioned, restorative justice is an approach. It's a way of addressing a harm in a way that, by the way, is not innovative, is not new. There have been, our Native communities have, across the world, have addressed harm in this way. When there is a harm that was caused in the community, everybody, for centuries, everybody would come and address it together. Mom, dad, aunties, uncles, elders would all be informed of what has happened and all come together to address the harm that was caused. So this kind of approach is an old approach. However, in our criminal justice system, it only has about, it was started in 1970s when we started using this kind of approach in the criminal justice setting when a crime has been committed and somehow incorporate that in our justice system. That's fairly new. It started in the 1970s. So it's about 50 years old. Research has much evolved since. It has grown in ways that you can't even imagine. There's lots and lots of more data now on restorative justice as an evidence-based practice. And the results are evident in terms of meeting the needs of the parties that participate in this kind of approach. And so just for those that are maybe not familiar on restorative justice, this approach can be used in our educational system. It can be used in our healthcare system. It can be used in our communities, our churches, our synagogues. These are practices that are based on restorative principles. So what are restorative principles? Let me just kind of go here in terms of restorative principles. Oops, let me go back to my graph. The restorative principles have this unique thing where there are certain ingredients that are needed in order to be restorative. A restorative justice approach, when the harm has been caused, it is necessary to involve the person that is responsible for the harm, the person that experienced the harm, and members of the community in some ways, because the community has also been affected by the harm that was caused. And so as long as we have all those parties participating, we are looking at a very inclusive approach. We're looking at a more restorative approach than what we're used to. So think about it this way. When I talk about the restorative justice in the criminal justice setting, think about restorative justice being this umbrella, this approach. where underneath that umbrella are all these different types of practices. So you have things like a victim offender mediation program, or family conferences, or community circles, or sentencing circles, panels. These are all different practices that, or models, I should say, that have been used in different areas of society. So here you'll see there are other models, other combination of practices tailored to the needs of the community and systems in which they find themselves in. So I'll give an example. The victim offender dialogue program that we have here is exactly that, a victim offender dialogue that we facilitate. So the two parties that were involved talk about what happened, with the goal of trying to repair the harm that was caused. And the best person to tell us how to repair the harm is the person that was victimized, the person that experienced the harm. And so we'll explore things like what kind of impacts did that person suffer? We'll talk about financial harm, emotional harm, physical harm, even spiritual harm. There's some people that have said, you know, I've lost all faith in humanity after being attacked, after experiencing the victimization. And so restoring that sense of safety, that sense of community, that can also be a need that surfaces in the aftermath of crime. Family conferences, you'll see that kind of model in places where often when we work with youth, when we have that youth come in and they explain to us what happened, and we bring together collectively with family, with maybe mentors, with other practitioners, and we'll come together and talk about a plan moving forward. What are ways that we can repair the harm that was caused, but also how are we meeting the needs of the offender or the perpetrator in terms of addressing the root causes that led to the behavior in the first place. So family conferences are often a model that is used for youth in the event that it's possible. A lot of the time they don't have that kind of support. And so we'll bring in community members that they might be familiar with or comfortable with, like teachers or mentors or other people in the community that can help them. And so I can go on in terms of the different types of models, but that's just to give you an idea. And so here's a video. I found two videos that kind of explain broadly what restorative justice aims to accomplish. And I want to make sure that people, as you view this, that you view this as in trying to understand the approach and the philosophy that they're trying to adopt when addressing crime. It's not about pointing fingers. It's not about pointing out or highlighting the gaps in our system, but rather, how does restorative justice come and meet some of the needs that have been left unmet, whether because of the system or because we just haven't identified those needs early on. So let me see, hopefully this works out. The beauty of PowerPoints and virtual meetings, right? So let's see. I'm hoping, share sound. Okay, I think it should work. This is a video that was made by Joy. Gosh, now I'm going to be blanking on restorative. I think it's Oakland Youth. We'll see it at the end. I'm totally blanking on the name. But this is a video that I found a few years ago, and I thought it briefly explained what restorative justice aims to do, and I think it explains it well.
More than half of victims of violent crime don't even call the police in the first place. They prefer nothing to everything we have to offer. The vast majority of crime survivors' pain goes unhealed. What the existence of restorative justice means is that we can no longer pretend we don't know what else to do. As a country, we're really good at punishment. It's passive. It doesn't require people to act, to think. It certainly doesn't require them to change. When we lock people up, we excuse them from their responsibility to answer for what they've done. Restorative justice is a process to hold them accountable. It's a tool. People take turns answering questions like what happened, what needs arise, whose responsibility is it to meet those needs, and how is that person going to do it? It requires someone to take responsibility, to repair things as much as possible, and to never commit that harm again. This isn't about feeling sorry, it's about doing sorry. Things like go to school, get a job, pay restitution, apologize, do community service. Restorative justice practices have been used to address low-level infractions like vandalism, up to addressing the impact of murders on the surviving family members. Restorative justice processes are first and foremost about meeting the needs of people who are hurt. Sometimes the person who can make the greatest contribution to a survivor's healing is the person who harmed them. To come through trauma, we need answers to our questions. To say, my life was never the same after you hurt me like that. Crime survivors want the most safety possibly available. So if incarceration actually produced safety, we would have the safest country in human history. That's not what we have. The core drivers of violence are shame, isolation, an inability to meet one's economic needs, and exposure to violence. And we bake those into prisons to try and keep people from committing further violence. Incarceration exposes people to exactly the things that increase the likelihood that they'll go on to harm others. People who are hurt deserve a process that will help them heal. People who are responsible for crime have an obligation to be accountable for that. All of us deserve responses to crime that actually make us safer. Our current criminal justice system doesn't deliver any of those, and restorative justice at its best delivers them all.
All right, so I don't know how to get out of here. Let me see if I can, there we go. There is another video also on, it's services provided, restorative justice services provided in the UK, and it focuses a little bit more on what the victims obtain and what they really can benefit from these kinds of programs. And so if you Google and you go on YouTube and you Google restorative justice programs, restorative justice processes, transformative justice, there's a lot of different terms, and the terminology in restorative justice, I think that's why it's hard sometimes to describe or gather information on a lot of the different practices that are available in your community, because a lot of people use different terms. So, so you'll find things like restorative justice, restorative practices, transformative justice. There's dialogue between victim and offenders, circles, and so all of these are words that I'm throwing out there so that you can do your own research and find some interesting stuff on the internet. Let's see if I can move on to, so here's the distinct, there's a difference between how we traditionally focus on crime with our criminal justice system versus what restorative justice focuses on. I'm talking about the general approach of restorative justice. I'm not talking about this specific program that we run here in probation. So generally speaking, the traditional criminal justice system focuses on what law was broken, what crime was committed, who broke the law, and how should that person be punished? Or what do the laws say in terms of should we address this kind of incident? Whereas restorative justice is a different lens that people use. Practitioners will look at what happened. What was the harm that was caused? How can the harm be repaired? Who is responsible for that reparation? Who is involved and affected by this? So when you start asking questions like that are a bit more in terms of focused on the harm that was caused, the outcome can sometimes be very different. So what restorative justice is not, it's not about, you'll hear a lot about how restorative justice is about forgiveness. Oh, so what, you place a victim and an offender in a room and they apologize and they move on, right? It's a simplistic way of seeing things. a restorative justice process can be very, very difficult. It can be grueling in terms of just looking back at what happened. For some victims, not having finally the opportunity to talk about what happened is often the first time in a restorative justice process. The criminal justice system can be very confusing. I have been working in it for years, and I still sometimes struggle with finding some information or understanding certain processes. And so I can't imagine being a victim and having the trauma of what has occurred and then trying to figure out what has happened to the case, who am I supposed to be contacting? Am I supposed to be contacted, or am I supposed to show up in court? And what happened? Who was this person? I have all these questions. Was there intent? Was it planned? Was I targeted? Does that person even understand the impacts of the crime? Do they even understand that I'm still suffering the consequences of it today, but it happened 3 years ago? There's all these kinds of things that for a victim, these needs surface, and they don't always surface early on, right after the crime has been committed. Sometimes it takes time for victims to begin to identify their needs. And so this process helps them by asking those kinds of questions. What was the harm that you suffered? In what ways were you impacted? What do you think needs to happen moving forward? So those are questions that are being asked. What restorative justice is not, it does not necessarily mean a meeting face-to-face between the offender and the victim. Now, I use these labels, offender and victims, for the purposes of, so that we're all understanding a little bit of who the parties are. But in our process, we often refer to people as the person who has been harmed, who has experienced harm, and the person who caused harm. And the reason we use those terms or that terminology is because we want to remove some of those labels and really get to the core of humanizing the process and getting to what the needs are of the individuals. Restorative justice, because restorative justice is also focused on reintegrating not just the offender back into the community, but the victim as well. Often after a crime has happened, they both struggle in terms of going back into the community. For some victims, it's really hard to move on. And even going back to work can be sometimes something difficult for them. It is not a particular program or blueprint, so it is difficult to define. So that's why it's always important when you go into meetings that have to do with restorative justice, ask the question, what do you mean by restorative justice? What do you mean by restorative practices? Are we talking about a specific program here, or are we talking generally speaking, how do we do things more restoratively? And so that will help you navigate through some of these programs that are available out in the community and in our system. It is not necessarily an alternative to the criminal justice system. So right now, as we currently, the program that we run here in the probation department, I work with diversion level cases. So cases that are perceived on the less serious end in terms of offenses that are eligible for diversion. That means that they are eligible to being diverted from the criminal justice system. And if those cases or those individuals complete the diversion restorative justice program, the goal is that the system lets the parties figure out and resolve the matter between them if they can. And if they're satisfied at the end of the process and that they have had their needs met, then the charges are then dismissed. It is sort of this opportunity for the parties to resolve it. And if upon being successful and satisfied, they're able to move on. But it is not always the case. In a lot of other countries, and including what we're trying to accomplish here in Marin, is that kind of approach can actually coexist with the current criminal justice system as it stands. So we can let the courts do whatever they need to do, but why not offer a restorative justice approach alongside what happens in court? Why not facilitate some dialogue between the parties? if the case meets the criteria and it's appropriate to offer restorative justice, why not offer that opportunity where the victim can have that kind of dialogue with the offender? Again, not necessarily meeting, it could be the facilitation and exchange of the information can be done through the restorative justice facilitator or a mediator. And of course, it's not exclusively for young offenders or less serious offenses. As you saw in the video, restorative justice is actually something that works best for more serious cases where there has been a lot of trauma, where there has been a lot of harm, because often that's when there are the most questions and where answers to those questions can actually be transformative for the parties involved. And it's not easy. I have seen individuals who have gone through the restorative justice process. One of the major, one of the things that I feel lucky to experience while facilitating these processes is that I get to see people in the beginning of a process where they are triggered in so many ways. They are having difficulty expressing their needs, where they are just very closed off and not trusting and really struggling with addressing the harm that was caused, to then going through this whole process and then me not even recognizing the individuals at the end of the process, where they have grown in insight and healing. And it's amazing to see community members become community again. So it's quite something, but it is not easy and it can take a long time, especially if there has been a lot of trauma. We recently had a case where there was the death of an individual, and the family of the deceased wanted to meet the person responsible for or some kind of involvement in the case. And that process took 13 months to really go through, because we are supporting and assisting and accompanying the parties through the process until they feel that they have addressed everything they needed to address and nothing has been left unsaid. I think I touched on that. Some of the research on RJ. So we can see here that there's a decrease in recidivism. It actually makes a difference in reoffending. It has more impact. You see the gap in recidivism, the impact on that, the more the case is serious. And I think because it's so impactful, I think that's why you see it more. Diversion level cases already the reoffending rate is already pretty low. And so we don't see that significant gap. We see it more on cases that I work on that are on probation or supervised probation. There's a high satisfaction rate. You may have seen in the video, there's a 99% satisfaction rate, and that's on both sides, on both the offender side and the victim side. And it's because they have an active role in what justice means to them. They get to determine what are the reparations that are going to be agreed upon to repair the harm that was caused. They have a voice in this process. There's an increased positive perception of the criminal justice system. Once they've completed, you tend to hear them say that the system is fair, that there's justice. And again, it goes back to them being participants in what that means for them. But they have their view of the criminal justice system increases and in positivity. And so it's pretty interesting to see. Decrease in feelings of revenge and fear. Decrease in post-traumatic stress symptoms. And this is on both sides. We often forget that there have been, the reason why I got involved in this kind of work was because I worked with offenders, with female offenders, formerly incarcerated felons. They had felonies. And in hearing their stories, I found out that maybe 99% of them had experienced victimization before the criminal behavior even began. And so I understood there that it's not two sides. It's often the same person, and you can find victim offender in the same person. And their post-traumatic stress symptoms are there very early on. And it's not because you offend that you don't have trauma in your own life. Often you will find trauma and addiction, and a lot of different factors that played a role in the decision-making of that person. Positive effects, and so the restorative justice process, you see reduction in the post-traumatic stress symptoms that both sides experience. Levels of fear go down, levels of that sense of safety increases. There's more of an openness to sharing and reaching out to resources and help, therapy possibly. And so there's a little bit of that, and we see the positive effects on it. We see the positive effects on physical and psychological health and sense of support. And cost benefit analysis, now I have a whole binder of the benefits and costs for our community and how much money it actually saves. If recidivism goes down in reoffending, imagine how many people are being provided the services, victims that haven't become victims, right? We reduce the levels of victims. It's just astounding in terms of the costs for a community to consider when implementing a program like this. Oops, let's see, I think I pretty much, I think the last point that I would add would be the financial obligations. So we've noticed in studies and the data shows that people who go through a restorative justice process where there's restitution that is owed to the victim are more likely to actually come up with their financial obligations and meet them than people who are simply ordered to pay restitution. And the theory there is that they are accountable to a person versus accountable to a judge or to a system. They've gotten to know this individual. They've gotten to hear the consequences that their actions had on the victim. I've had offenders tell me, my gosh, like I used to hate coming into the probation department. And now after hearing what my victim had to say, this is the least that I could do, is to come to my appointments, pay my restitution. It's the very least that I could do after hearing the impact that I've had. So I think I'm going to leave it in terms of the criteria. I think the things that I look for. So before I go into that, I don't know, Denise, how are we doing on time?
Right now we are at 6:38. I think you're doing fine.
Okay. Before I go into our program and the criteria and the stuff that I look for when I work on cases, I know that some of you are in the community and you're kind of wondering, well, how does this, as a community member, how does this affect me? Or do I have access to these resources? So there are, right now, I have to work with somebody who has been, who is justice involved in some way. And so somehow touching the criminal justice system. So if they've committed a crime or they've committed an offense and they're looking at possible charges, those are the people that I work with. Now, if you are not connected to the criminal justice system, but you have experienced harm, there are other restorative justice community-based organizations in Marin that can provide that same approach where they bring people together. Let's say it's a neighbor dispute. There are organizations that can help you resolve those issues, to be heard, to talk about how do we resolve this matter between us, and then follow up with the accountability piece and making sure that those agreements are respected. Again, you'll find them through Googling and researching. We're hoping to develop a network where we connect with different practitioners and facilitate and distribute that information to the community. We're getting there. A lot of the stuff is being done in silos, and communication between practitioners needs to improve. But in terms of this program, I work with the probation department. So I need to have some kind of jurisdiction on the case, whether it's a case that's being supervised by probation or a diversion case that is being referred to us by the district attorney's office in support and supported by the defense attorney, whether that's a private attorney or a public defender. So both the defense attorney and DA must support the referral to the program. That's how it comes to us. And so it's important for us to reach out to the DA's office, reach out to the public defender's office and private attorneys, legal aid, all different stakeholders that work on these cases so that they're informed that there is a restorative justice program that they can refer the case to. In terms of the criteria, so when a case comes to me, what do I look for? I look for things like, is the defendant remorseful? He doesn't have to, or she doesn't have to be perfect. What I'm looking for is acknowledgement of creating harm. Acknowledgement, can that person look at that day, that incident, and say, I could have handled that differently? I understand that in a lot of cases, it's gray. It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray and nuances in when an incident happens. Often somebody, if we take a road rage incident, for example, somebody says something, somebody does something, and it escalates, and it just goes out of control. So often it's not quite clear, you know, whose fault was it? And that's not what the point of restorative justice is. It's about just talking about what happened and what needs to happen moving forward. And so what I look for is, do I have a defendant that can acknowledge at least their responsibility in what happened? And are they willing to hear the other party out, even though that might be difficult? Are they willing to take concrete steps towards repairing the harm? What does that mean, concrete steps? Measurable, anger management class, restitution, volunteering, a donation to a charity that is meaningful to the victim, letters of apology, verbal apology, a meeting face-to-face. All of these things are reparative measures or actions that contribute to the accountability piece. And it's often while doing those things that there's an aha moment for the defendant, where upon hearing how the crime impacted the victim, there is a sort of insight that begins to take place for the defendant. I had one defendant, this was many, many years ago, where the defendant was in prison for multiple burglaries. And it was only upon participating in a restorative process with a victim that he understood for the first time, and I quote, he said, wow, I didn't even think I had victims. And I was kind of surprised. And he goes, because there was never anybody at the house. I always made sure that there was nobody when I would go into these homes. Insurance would cover, most of the time, insurance would cover these things. And so I just never understood that I had victims. And it was when I heard, it was a lady who participated, who was a victim. It was when I heard this lady talk about how when her husband jiggles the keys when he comes back home and enters the house, her entire body freezes because she doesn't know who's coming in that moment. And it brings her back to that moment that there was a burglary, even though she wasn't in the home. Somehow the trauma of having somebody invade her personal space translated into her freezing completely when hearing her husband trying to come into the house. And in hearing her, he was like, I didn't know that I had created victims, and I didn't know that I could impact somebody this way. And it was for the very first time he understood that he had multiple victims. And then we talked about families of that victim and family members and neighbors who suddenly are now locking their door because they heard of our neighbor getting burglarized, you know? And so there's this kind of insight that for some reason years went by while he was in prison, and never once had he had to be accountable for that. But it was until he went through this process that he understood the impacts and began to develop empathy towards the other party that he had harmed. Obviously, there needs to be an identifiable victim in the case. And so cases like petty theft at Walmart or Target are usually cases that we don't take, unless it's a small mom and pop shop where the victims are easily identifiable and we can truly have a representative of that party participate in the process. We've had the Marin County Water District, who typically I wouldn't be reaching out to them as a victim in cases of vandalism, but we've had representatives of that agency say, yeah, we never hear from the offenders. We never hear from people vandalizing our community. So it's kind of cool to hear how they're remorseful and they're taking concrete steps. And let me tell you how my staff has been impacted in going out there, repairing and fixing the vandalism. Those are things that are really, really important to hear through a restorative justice process. It says here, no domestic violence cases. So I should put on there, no domestic violence cases yet, or with certain exceptions, only because I'm somebody who believes, and there are many practitioners who believe that restorative justice can be beneficial in domestic violence cases, but many of them are not appropriate. In many cases, it is not appropriate for there to be contact between the parties, right? And it's actually a safety issue. But there are a lot of families that do have domestic violence issues and have kids, and those people are forever going to be connected in some ways. And for specific cases that we evaluate and that we assess, perhaps communication, maybe not face-to-face, but through the restorative justice facilitator, can be beneficial. I would personally not feel comfortable working on these cases if I were to not be, unless being accompanied by a domestic violence expert or somebody who provides these services to victims of domestic violence, to be able to see the dynamics and better understand the dynamics that are going on in a circle or in a meeting. And so those are, there are always exceptions. I think that restorative justice can help in all cases, but those are just cases that I would rather be careful, more intentional in terms of how I address that case. The program needs to be voluntary. So I know that when I do presentations to judges or to attorneys, often they'll say like, well, why don't we just put it as a condition in their probation or as a condition of their sentence? And although that would be great, there's something to the fact that a program and that kind of process is voluntary. It is much more meaningful for a victim to have this kind of process knowing that the other party wants to participate in it versus having to do it or getting some kind of benefit from participating and completing the process. Now, I know that for the diversion level cases, the benefit is a dismissal. And often I have people ask me, well, how do you know? How do you know if parties are really, if the defendant is, the perpetrator is really sincere? And my answer is, I don't. I know that it is a meaningful process when that person has been fully engaged, participating in all the meetings, going above and beyond in terms of demonstrating their accountability, actually taking concrete steps towards addressing the root causes of their behavior, whether that is looking at their sobriety and their addiction problems, or whether that is looking at their anger issues, paying restitution, finding ways of paying back, finding ways of giving back to the community, looking at their efforts and trying to repair and make amends. That's when you know, are they being consistent? Are they showing up? And are they being reasonable in the way that they are trying to repair the harm? That's when you know. Just like basic relationships. How do you know that your partner will be faithful? How do you know that your friend will be a good friend? You don't. It's through time and consistency and behaviors and patterns that you end up trusting that person and you end up seeing if there's truth to it or not. It's without prejudice. So people need to be able to participate in this kind of process without the fear of having negative consequences by admitting to things or being truthful. The whole point of restorative justice is really getting to the truth. But if the truth will get you into trouble, then it won't work. And so our process is confidential, and anything that the parties share between them remains confidential. The only thing that goes back to court is what the parties have decided to share. So they will share how they've resolved the matter between them, and they can be as detailed as possible or not. The courts, what they want to know is when they refer a case to me, they want to know, have the parties resolve things between them. Are they satisfied? Are they okay with the dismissal? And is there anything further needed? And I think that's it. I think I've explained the general, and I went into that. So this is my contact information. If you want any information on the program itself, or if you would like a certain community or group to learn more about restorative justice, I would be happy to answer some questions. And I do make these kind of presentations as often as I can. And when I am available, you are looking at a team of 2 for this restorative justice program. We're hoping to grow. I know that our chief of probation has great ideas and a big vision in terms of expanding our services even more. We're looking at expanding not just diversion level cases that we're going to be working on, not just probation cases, but everything in between. So post-plea cases, cases that are a bit more serious, and having those conversations about how do we provide restorative services to those serious cases, even though they're going through the criminal justice system that we have. How do we meet the needs of the parties at different stages in the criminal justice system? So there's my phone number, there's my email, and Wayne Wilshire is the restorative justice assistant. He's been helping me for now a little over a year. And we've been delighted with the progress that we've made. The number of cases have increased, the number of referrals have increased. And so we're hoping to add even more to our team. But to even have a unit, to even have a little team that focuses on restorative justice is a big deal for Marin County. We are the first probation department in California to have a restorative justice program for adults. Now, there are other counties that have RJ for youth, but for adults is the first one in California that is in-house. And so we're pretty excited about that, and we're excited to see what the future holds for this program.
Well done.
Thanks, Denise. I don't know if we have time. I try to give as much information as I could, but I don't know what kind of questions you guys have received, either through the chat, because I haven't been able to see it, or if we have time for questions.
We have time, and Lori will be our guru for the questions, if she wouldn't mind. She can probably see them more clearly.
Okay, good.
Lori?
So I'm not seeing questions right now. Does anyone have questions?
Oh, I see some in the chat, maybe. Will you be sending out these slides? I can make them, I just have to take a look at them again. I think the videos, I can't share, but I can share the titles, I think. So I'll take a look at my presentation again, and I'll send, I don't know how Lori or how your team would disseminate this information.
Well, first off, we'll make sure that this video is posted on YouTube. You'll get a copy of it. Lori will send you one. And we're delighted that this is available to the public. We didn't want to limit this just to folks that could actually attend.
Got it.
And that's been both kind of, and I know I initially looked at it, this would be a bane and a blessing because of COVID. It inspired us to get it on the web. And again, I have to tip my hat to the wonderful staff we have at the law library that makes these things happen.
Well, thank you, Denise.
With gratitude. And I believe there were a couple of other comments in the chat, but I'm not sure if there are questions.
Lori Frigoli had to leave, but she thanked you for an amazing and much appreciated presentation.
She's so sweet. That's awesome. Thank you, Lori.
May I make a comment in our community, and I hope people will take this to heart. This program we began with a member from the Public Defender's Office. In the last year, we've had Otis Bruce here. We have had members of the Star Courts, and may I say that for our little community, Here we are, next door neighbors, the smaller next door neighbors to a big city like San Francisco. We have a restorative justice program. We have Star Court. There are amazing things happening in our community, and the wonderful people who are involved in them and work in them all day are some of the most generous, donors to this program by appearing. How lucky can we be?
Lots of support. And I think that's what made it successful, is that when we started this program, we started it in a restorative way. What did we say in terms of restorative justice? You need to involve the different stakeholders that have been affected or involved. And so the approach that we took, I don't know if it was a natural approach that existed already here, but I know that when I first got here, it was a collaboration with the district attorney's office, with the public defender's office. We had some people from legal aid. It worked out where we all kind of sat down and we talked about, okay, restorative justice is definitely on the agenda, but how will it work for all of us? How does the program need to be tailored in order to meet the needs of everybody, on top of meeting the needs of the victims of crime and the people who have caused the harm?
May I also give a shout out for not only law libraries, but the library system that we have here in Marin County. There are opportunities for members of the community to come, not just to the law library for First Thursdays, but take a look at what the County Free Library provides for our community. Mm-hmm. We really are blessed in Marin. As difficult as it is sometimes with the problems that we faced as a community in what has been almost 2 years now with COVID, there's been a remarkable interest in community events and sharing information. And that's a good thing to come from this.
Yeah. There's, I saw a question in terms of, it's interesting that you mentioned that in the last 2 years, we've faced a lot of challenges and a lot of difficulties. Our entire community has. And we have seen a spike in just mental health and suicide rates and just a lot of challenges, depression, anxiety, a lot of that stuff. Already things that we were seeing in our criminal justice system with the clients that we serve here at the probation department, but it has increased significantly. And also the types of referrals that I'm getting. So diversion level cases, some of these cases I've either had to partner with a mental health practitioner to address some of the issues that we were seeing, because the referrals that we were getting, we started seeing that there was just a lot more mental health issues that we were identifying. I know that there is a mental health diversion. I'm not sure. We have some. I see Otis. I'm not sure in terms of what programs are now available as a mental health diversion, but the restorative justice diversion program typically doesn't take cases where there's severe mental health, only because the restorative justice process needs parties that are able to have a dialogue, who are able to talk about accountability, who can address the root causes of the behavior. And so if I don't have somebody who's at least able to have a conversation, that kind of dialogue to that level, it's difficult or even understanding their responsibility and what happened. That's often something that blocks the process. And so other options are then looked at for those kinds of cases. But it is something that we're looking at, that we're very much conscious about, and that we are absolutely addressing. I know that a lot of our cases here at the probation department, a lot of our probation officers are just very much aware of the needs there and how important it is to address those needs in order to address the root causes and the behavior.
The absolute...
Denise, excuse me, I'd also just like to point out, Otis sent a thank you to all of us at the law library and to Cindy for her excellent presentation, and congratulations to Cindy and the probation department for having the first of this type of program. in the state. It's really awesome for Marin. And Marlon Washington also said, excellent job representing the Restorative Justice Program and probation, and also added that there is a mental health diversion court. So wonderful.
Thank you, Lori. Can I make a comment about some of the people that we've heard from tonight and how remarkable you truly are in the way you collaborate? The other efforts, and I believe we've had the good fortune of having someone from New Beginnings present, but we have a public defender's office, we have a district attorney's office, we have the courts involved in record expungement and sealing. This is another component for people who are trying to put situations with the law into some perspective in their lives as they go on. People who would like to apply for jobs, rejoin their families in certain types of housing. We often think of the adversarial elements between these groups. May I tell you that here in Marin County, my firsthand experience of watching these various organizations work together, we are very, very lucky. We have a group of professionals who do much beyond what we normally think of as their jobs, and we're quite lucky.
I think this is a county, at least in what I have seen in Canada, in New Zealand, and here in the United States, there are, here in Marin County, there is a strong focus on identifying some of those criminogenic needs and factors that really play a role in why the person was even involved in the criminal or got involved in the criminal justice system in the first place. So some of that is mental health, some of that is past trauma, addiction, all of that stuff. There is there's even a caseload here at the probation department that focuses on people who have served in the armed forces, veterans where we recognize the complexity and the dynamics that can sometimes be present in somebody's life after having served, dealing with mental health, dealing with trauma, and somehow translating into no longer functioning well in their community and having problems with relationships and having difficulties accessing resources. And so we have key players in our criminal justice system that see those needs and have gone above and beyond to try to address those things. That's why we have so many specialty courts. We have drug court, we have STAR court, which addresses the mental health issues. We have a mental health diversion court. We have this caseload for veterans. There's even a team that is for people who are incarcerated in our jails that focus on the reintegration of those individuals. So making case planning for them, making sure that they have access to medication and programming and housing, all of those things. And so it is pretty amazing. There's a lot of committees out there. Trust me, I attend a lot of them. There are a lot of committees out there that try to address these issues. And so it's not for the lack of trying, that's for sure. The efforts are there. It's just the resources sometimes are lacking, especially now with COVID. A lot of programs have closed their doors or have unfortunately stopped providing services because they couldn't anymore. But people are finding innovative ways to meet some needs there.
We will look forward, and I'd like you to think about this when you're ready with more new exciting news, which you've teased us about tonight, plans that you'd like to bring to fruition. We'd love to have you back.
I would be happy to. Thank you for the opportunity to even let me talk about the Restorative Justice Program. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate learning about it so that I, for people that come into the law library that have questions, it's really great to know about all these programs that we have in our county. And it is an amazing array of programs that are available here.
Thank you. For people who do come to the law library, because you were saying that so many people self-represent, the simple fact of knowing that there's a restorative justice program and that they can bring that up to whoever they talk to in the DEA's office, or if they try to get a public defender or legal aid, whoever they talk to as they're entering the criminal justice system and trying to get information, them being able to just voice, hey, can I be connected to the restorative justice program? And then we can assess whether or not that referral is supported by the DA and public defender. But if they're self-representing, they can bring up that idea to the DA expediter and then have a conversation. If that's possible, then they get referred to us.
These avenues that are so important are so valuable to our clientele. I can only encourage you to develop closer relationships, and I can definitely see this happening with our law library staff because they're our front line. And I genuinely believe Lori will be glad to be in communication with you and your department and let you know what some of her experiences are with questions that she feels.
It would be so important. Yes. Let's keep those communications.
There's one more chat message I need to express, and that is Liddell Dangerfield stated, on behalf of the Public Defender's Office, I'd like to congratulate the Probation Department and the District Attorney's Office for the stellar communication and cooperation. The work of Mr. Washington, Mr. Bruce, and Ms. Frigoli is truly remarkable.
Yeah, there were definitely people that were there. It wasn't that no cards, no people. The people that I was hoping would show up.
Julia
wait.
Eric Gelman's buyer's agent showed up. Karen Narodny.
I don't know where this is coming from.
It's coming. Julia Main, if you may mute your mic, please.
Sorry about that. I was trying to mute everybody that wasn't muted, and I couldn't.
That's okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Dangerfield.
All right, wait. Now let's see. I got to unmute Denise. See.
I wanted to add the next step for us to sort of just increasing the awareness of the program would be to go into the different departments. Since COVID, there have been new employees that have come into the county into our different departments. And so learning about the Restorative Justice Program is definitely on my to-do list to go and teach and educate people that this program exists. That's my next step. And yes, being able to find opportunities in the community, even though I don't work directly with people in the community, you would be surprised how people are affected by or know somebody that might be justice involved and somehow connected, or be a victim of a crime, and they don't know what resources are available out there. And so it would be good for us to continue building those bridges for sure. So Lori, yes, we will definitely be in touch.
Good.
We are delighted. I think we're running a little over at this point. Lori, are there any more questions or comments?
I don't see any more.
May I thank everyone that came tonight. We're delighted that you came. It was a thought-provoking evening, and I believe that we'll have some of these very same faces appearing with us with other groups, because the one thing that we discover through the justice system is how interconnected so much of what we do in this life really is. I'd like to thank Cindy. I'd like to thank her department for having the vision to support her in her efforts. I'd like to thank the probation department, the district attorney's office, and the very lovely comments that we've had from other organizations tonight. I would particularly like to once again return and thank our wonderful law library staff, and I'd like to extend an invitation. If you're interested, next month we'll be hosting Director Mark Shotwell of the Ritter Center. If any of you have had a chance to look at the Marin County Bar Association newsletter, there was a lovely piece this month. I'd also like to encourage you, if you know someone who needs legal assistance, I believe our next Lawyers in the Library is October 14th. I encourage you to contact Lori at the Law Library. And I want to thank you tonight for taking time out of your schedule and joining us. We hope to see each and every one of you at an upcoming event with our legal community. I think we're all worthwhile, and I think you are too.
Thank you.
Thank you.